Subscriber Thomas Brudder asks a question about attaching a sled to myself. Why not use poles instead of rigging? Because of the bouncing and stress on the hips, or because of crevasses? I see the poles as better maneuverability and avoiding being crushed by the sled going downhill. Thomas Brudder, thank you very much for the question. Please leave questions in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. So Thomas Brudder is talking about when I attach the sled to myself using a harness or my backpack or whatever, why do I choose a bungee system with rope versus a set of PVC poles? Usually people just use 3/4. This is 1 inch. Yeah, that's 1 inch pipe. And the idea is that when I attach myself to my sled here, I'll just clip on one carabiner here. When I attach myself to my sled, I have complete flexibility going uphill, no problem. The downside is when I'm going downhill on a steep slope, the sled will actually run after me and then run me over and stab me. So that is a huge downside to this. This is a lighter rigging setup for sure. And the way I've adapted and dealt with it is drag lines. I use these 6mm cords as sacrificial cords. As you can see here, it's pretty fuzzed up, but it still works. And depending on the amount of drag, I simply put 1, 2, or even 3 cords with knots, just simple overhand knots, under the sled, and that makes the sled completely slow down. Now, if there's wind, like on Windy Corner, on Denali or somewhere, I've had my sled, even with drag cords, blow past me, tumble around, and drag me off, almost off the cliff. That was exciting. Now, the advantage of using poles, and what you do is you attach the poles to your harness on your backpack, and then you begin pulling the sled, and that works very well as well. I've seen people using that on Denali, in Yellowstone, in Minnesota, where people go trekking into woods, and you just simply attach them to a couple points on here using a couple pieces of rope, and you attach it to your body. The sled's behind you, and voila, you can drag the sled. Definitely advantageous for going downhill because the sled will simply push you and it will stop, and the rigidity of the pipes will prevent the sled from running me over. But a couple things you have to be careful of. If you attach these pipes super close to your body and they're super close to the sled, where there is no give, maybe like 5 or 6 inches or 15 centimeters of rope, the problem is as you're moving along and the sway of your hips, you will actually be skiing like this. And I had this happen in Yellowstone. The very first time I went out, I bought a steel pole fixed design where I was hard linked to the sled. And the problem is the sled for 100 miles or 160 kilometers literally wiggled every step I took, and I put a huge amount of energy into wiggling that sled as I was moving along because I had hard fixed points. So one of the best designs I've seen on Denali is where the climber had a good 6 inches or 15 centimeters of rope here on the hips and then also on the sled. That way there was no more wasted energy in wiggling that sled back and forth, but when the sled caught up to them, the pipes would hit and no problem. Now, a couple of challenges with the pipe design is if the sled gets out of control, these pipes will end up crossing and yanking you around, and now you've got this fixed pipe pushing on your back. I have had my sled get out of control many times just because of slope, wind, or whatever. I mean, I've literally had the wind blow my 120-pound sled around me and almost yanked me off a cliff. I talk about that in my book, Lost at Windy Corner. So there is that downside. Some people believe in the crossed bar approach, where they cross the bars on the sled, and that works very well as to help prevent that sort of out of control. But again, this works really great if you're going straight downhill, where there's no chance of your sled overtaking you and turning over. But when you've got these pipes and your sled gets out of control and goes sideways, it's really, really hard to deal with this with fixed pipes on your hip. So the wiggling problem, where you're wiggling the sled back and forth, it doesn't sound like much, but after doing that for 10 days of literally putting a lot of energy in just to making my sled wiggle back and forth, that was murderous. Just, woo, that was terrible. Also, another thing, if I've got my sled behind me, and my sled's right here, and I've got my fixed harness on, and I want to go back to my sled for whatever reason, how am I going to do that? I've got these fixed pipes. There's no way I can come back and mess with my sled without having to unclip both pipes off me, drop them, come back, maybe get some snacks, maybe get some whatever, food, water out of my duffel or out of my bag. With fixed pipes, it's an operation. You really have to unclip and come back to your sled versus using a bungee line like I've got here. If I'm towing my sled and I'm coming along and I want to go back to my sled, I simply walk back and I'm at my sled, done. And then the moment I walk back, voila, because every break I'm going to stop, come back, go to my sled. Now in long distance polar exploration, like in Two Friends and a Polar Bear and my other book, Antarctic Tears, I'm not going to carry a backpack. I don't want to carry any weight whatsoever. So I'm going to keep all my snacks, my food, and everything in my bag. So if I have fixed poles on me and I got to unclip those things every time to come back to my sled and then pick them up and reclip them, that is wearing over a long expedition. So the downhill advantage of the sled is completely wiped out by having to go back here. On Denali, where maybe you're carrying a backpack and you've got a sled and you have all your snacks and water in your backpack, that's another game entirely. Then you still are committed to dropping your backpack. But these poles, that's a fight you have to get to deal with. So I definitely recommend trying out both. I've tried out both, and my general experience has been, even though my sled might run me over a little bit, I have these drag ropes that are on the sled that will, even when I put 3 drag ropes on here, coming down from Windy Corner on that steep slope to the big ice sheet before dropping to Squirrel Hill, these work perfectly until the sled just goes sideways and starts tumbling. Then, you're just going to be in a fight. But if your sled goes sideways, which it will, with these fixed pipes, and it goes sideways, and that twists around, you're in for a huge fight. Just consider that as long as everything's linear, the pipe system works spectacularly well, but on side hilling or where your sled gets out of control and it rolls, the pipes are actually a huge detriment. So in my humble opinion, I've gotten rid of the pipes. I've tried both, and I simply go with this drag loop. Other people have had spectacular experiences using the pipe and would never use a single lead line. So hopefully that answers the question, gives you an idea of what you can and can't do with this, and the big downsides of the pipes with wiggling the sled and also being able to have it come around and going back to your sled. So it's just something to consider. There are always trade-offs, but for me, the rope and the bungee is the way to go. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.